Hello, everyone. My name is Lisbeth, and now that you have read about the three different stages in the T3 framework, what are you going to do? I will tell you in this chapter summary of Chapter 6 regarding disruptive classroom technologies. So, an overview of what I will be covering before we get started is I will start with the chapter overview, then dive into the three different stages that the chapter covers, the different steps that the chapter covers. So, first we'll be talking about self assessment, then planning, and ending with evaluations. So, before I dive into what the chapter content entails, I would like to share with you a brief video that is about 1 minute long regarding the T3 framework and just a refresher of what the framework is and a brief description of what each stage encompasses. So, let's hear it.
What is the T3 framework? The T3 framework for innovation is a highly reliable pedagogical model for improving well-being and student mastery. The T3 framework consists of three domains: translational, transformational, and transcendent. Automation and consumption are principles of the T1 translational learning. Automating teaching and learning tasks and routines with technology, and students consume digital content. Production and contribution are principles of the T2 transformational learning. Students use technology to produce representations of their understanding, and students use technology to contribute to the learning of others. Inquiry design and social entrepreneurship are the principles of T3 transcendent learning. Students identify, investigate, and hypothesize solutions to real-world problems that matter to them. And students design and implement solutions to the wicked problems that matter to them. T3 guides teachers to more impactful and deeper levels of technology use by students. The strategies in the T3 framework were shown to quadruple student achievement.
All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that video. Again, just a brief introduction, brief rundown of what the framework is about. So now with that refreshment of what the framework is, we're going to go into how to apply it. Because
what is the T3?
Pause this really quick and let's go to the next slide. So the main point of this chapter, essentially, the big idea of chapter 6 is that it describes and discusses how an individual may choose to apply the T3 framework, essentially putting the framework into use, which is what the subtitle of this chapter is. It gives opportunities and resources for teachers and evaluators to self-assess, plan, and evaluate. Again, the three steps that we will be talking about today. And it's important to note that each stage has different prompts and guiding questions with regards to what specific stage you are in regards to the T3 framework. So let's say you're in the T1 with automation, the very first step. There's guiding questions for that specific stage, and then there's guiding questions for the next stage. So it's very broken down, very detailed oriented, and I strongly encourage you to take a look through the tables that are offered in the chapter because they are extremely useful, and I will be referencing them later on in this presentation. But the big picture, it moves from theory and dives into the action. So what we can do as educators and professionals. It helps teachers identify where their current practices fall within the stages and how to advance from them. Because Magana elaborates that just because we've reached that mastering level doesn't mean that we stop learning. We have to keep making sure that we make progress and find ways to improve our education. In this chapter, there's a lot of reflective questions and action steps that educators can take to, again, assess their progress and adapt their lesson plans based on the T3 stages. Starting with the very first step, the chapter goes into what self-assessment looks like and what self-assessment can be for educators. There are two different scales that are described at the beginning, so the nominal scale and the proficiency scale. The nominal scale, I think of numbers, so it's very number-based 3-point scale where teachers can track goals and monitor their progress, which is very much the type of style that Magana uses in the tables that he provides in this chapter. But he also adapts something called proficiency scales, which are associated with more clear feedback and large growth gains. So think of whether there are descriptions that are elaborating whether or not the standard or objective was met or if the goal was met. Another thing that goes into self-assessment is different categories of reflection. So Magana describes reflection on action and reflection in action. And the definition is pretty straightforward. I think it's within the name. Reflection on action happens when the task or the goal has been reached. You reflect upon your progress, what steps you got, what steps you took to get to that point. Whereas reflection in action occurs during the performance of the task. So it's while you are doing specific tasks or you're working towards different goals, you're stopping and reflecting on your progress. So very important to know the difference between the two. And the 3 stages of self-assessment he defines as low, medium, or high. Again, you're either at the beginning level, developing level, or mastering level. But again, it's important to note that no matter what level you are in, it's important to ensure that you are finding ways to improve your proficiency, no matter what stage you are in. An example of this can be viewed on page 91, where a 3-point teacher proficiency scale is shown in table 6.1. And then in 6.2, pages 91 to 94, an example of self-assessment categorized by each of the 3 stages, a part of the framework, is elaborated there as well. Moving on to the second step, which is the planning stage. The planning stage can also be thought of the drafting of goals, essentially, because Magana stresses that educators should establish and communicate precise goals for the planning of a professional growth development. And he recommends that you do this in collaboration with instructional coaches, principals, or your team, essentially a PLC. And this has been proven to be efficient because it was noted that when coaching activities are in place with the T3 framework, they complement the professional development aspect of things and they yield higher and significant improvements in the quality of classroom instruction. So if you have the opportunity to meet with an instructional coach or have a coach, I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that and do the experience, because not only will you become a better professional, but your quality of instruction will also improve. But going back to the goals, Magana stresses that goals should be 3 things: precise, measurable, and actionable. Very similar to the sort of objectives and goals that we drafted in the beginning of the year with the learning objectives assignment in this course. And if you check out tables 6.3 through 6.8, which can be found on pages 95 to 100, they offer guiding prompts to use when setting goals at each stage of the T3 framework, which I will actually be sharing with you all in the next slide. One of the tables. And here it is. So this sort of setup is very similar to what an IEP goal looks like. So if anyone is familiar with IEP goals, it follows the same sort of format. So what skill will be mastered, and then who is accountable for keeping that person accountable and by what date. So very similar to IEP goals. But if you notice, each table is broken down to dependent on the level that you are in. So if you're in the beginning stage, you're drafting a goal here. If you're in the developing stage, you're drafting a goal with this. And then if you're the mastering level, you're drafting a goal with this. Essentially, it's the same setup, but the description changes depending on the level of mastery that you are in. And again, it depends on what target you're reaching. So if you're looking for automation, then you would be using this type of prompt. And again, tables 6.3 to 6.8 go in depth into this guiding and professional goal settings dependent on the T3 framework stage, which I thought was pretty cool. So make sure you check out those pages. Again, pages 95 to 100 have a set of tables that go in depth into how you can set specific goals. And the last stage is the evaluation stage. Excuse me. The evaluation stage, not it's important because now that you have set goals, that you have had time to reflect on them, you should also be able to monitor and evaluate the progress that you have made on those specific goals. So in tables 6.9 to 6.14, found on pages 102 to 108, there are tables with guiding prompts that offer teachers an opportunity to evaluate their practices, focusing on the integration of the digital tools. So again, dependent on the stage that you are in, is the table that you are looking at, or the dependent on the stage that you want to analyze is the table that you're going to be looking at. And in the study guide, I have actually detailed with categories. So whether it is you're looking at analyzing your automation or your consumption or production or contribution. So depending on what stage you want to look at, there's a specific table for that. So again, I would encourage you to look through my study guide to pinpoint exactly what table. So it's just easier. But again, if you look through pages 102 to 108, you can see it right on the title. It's not very hard to discover and use. So these tables are used to analyze dependent on teacher and student evidence as well as proficiency skills descriptions. So again, just encourage you to look through those and maybe even make a copy or have a hard copy somewhere where digitalized or not, so you can keep track and use as a reference. That is all for me. I hope you enjoyed listening to my summary of this chapter. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. And